If Canada has a heartbeat, that heartbeat is the Canadian farm. For over 150 years, Canadian farmers have faced the toughest conditions head-on, with one goal in mind: to get food to your table.
Well, obviously, the farm is kind of a celebration of the hard work of our family. So, as many farms are, they're kind of a staple of family unity, family work.
This farm's been in our family for about 4 generations, since the 1800s. So we've focused on orchard and asparagus. So we grow apples, tart cherries, and some pears.
I enjoy being part of a business that impacts so many different families and really helps improve the quality of life for people.
My parents and I, well, we purchased the farm in 1990, but personally been doing it for almost about 20 years on my own.
It sure is fun getting up in the morning and having something that's actually contributing.
Horticulture is a quarter of agriculture in Canada. And it's what you actually go to the grocery store and pick that apple, pick that cherry.
Healthy eating is a hot topic these days, so it just seems like we're involved in an industry that's really in the hip and the now.
We have a microclimate in Canada that we can grow almost all the different types of food.
And to try and hire enough local people, we know isn't possible. There's a huge labor gap, especially in horticulture across the country.
Most people don't understand agriculture as a whole. I don't think they understand how much work goes into production. A lot of it's physical labor, so it is a lot of us picking, packaging, like we package all of our cucumbers by hand.
The days are possibly gone of lots of people realizing the benefits of working outside, getting some fresh air, using their muscles.
The reality is that lots of local people, they don't want to work in the farm because everybody looking for other jobs, inside, indoor jobs, right?
En sachant que le bassin d'emploi ici au Québec, Canada, on n'a pas de gens, c'est plate à dire, compétents pour faire la tâche. Des gens qui sont prêts à travailler de très très longues heures dans des conditions chaudes pour faire un ouvrage qui est essentiel pour la production agricole.
We used to hire a lot of local teenagers. They simply weren't interested in working the long hours outside in the sun. They wanted, short 3-hour days and just 3 days a week, and then they were on vacation for the 3 weeks that strawberries were ready. So it just was really hard to schedule and manage all of that.
For the last half-century or so, a group of people from places like Guatemala, Mexico, Trinidad, and Jamaica, people like Shervin, Nalini, Babu, and Joe, have come to Canada every year, stood beside our farmers and greenhouse operators, and made it possible for this extraordinary work to take place. And we've opened our hearts to them. That's just how it is in Canada.
If I didn't have access to labor from the Seasonal Agriculture Worker Program, I don't think I would be farming. My last year farming without bringing in my employees from Mexico, man, I was ready to give up. Just for my Golden Delicious, I went through 16 different people. Some people would say, oh, we'll be there tomorrow. They wouldn't show up. Other people would show up, but they would just be, dropping the apples like crazy, turning them into juice.
So the temporary foreign worker programs are essential in filling that gap, but also because you have the opportunity to offer a person a contract the next year, and they have the opportunity of whether or not they want to work for you again the next year. You have that opportunity to have consistency of training, so you're not training a whole group of people every year.
It's the way the world functions. We have to compete in this country against a lot of offshore products that are manufactured, grown, whatever, in economies where the standard of living is nowhere near what we dream of and live in Canada. If I did not have international farm workers, I would not be here. It's that bad. reliable labor. Period.
We're the Canadian Horticultural Council, and we want you to meet the workers who make our farms and greenhouses thrive, and the Canadian farmers who are their hosts. So, we're going to share some of those stories with you so you can find out what's going on down on the farm.
Pues allá ahorita están 180 todo el día, 200 cuando mucho.
I'm asking him what's the payment back in Mexico. He says maximum 200 pesos a day, which is the equivalent to $12, $13 for a whole day.
I start this program from 1988, and it take care of my family, my children to school. When I started it, I didn't know that I would be on it so long, but I started at a young age, and I grew on it. I have that love for this program.
It wasn't very complicated. We would apply for workers in the past, and it happened to be all men. Then one year we get a phone call from the Trinidad office going, you know, we'd like to know if you wouldn't mind having women on your farm. And we looked around, go, yeah, like what do you mean, would we mind?
I love the farm, right? This is my first experience being on a farm, and for me, it is very nice being here. I got the opportunity to help my family, so it is really, really nice for me.
When I started in 2009, they was taking women, and before they were saying they only was taking men on this farm, but then he decided to take women, which I was glad to come here.
And I've learned to do different things that I never thought that I could do, but I think at this farm you get a lot of opportunities, and it's up to you to take it and try new things.
This is like people back home, we would say this is our bread and butter. When we say our bread and butter, this is what we do to gain money. So if it's ever taken away from us, we don't know where we will fall. We don't know where we stand. So I think this is a very good opportunity for us, and having us come to Canada every year, it does a lot for us Trinidadians.
And it's not all about working, because I did some courses too, like first aid, to be on the field out here in case of somebody getting injured. I can assist. I got a certificate in it. And I learned to drive the bus. I also trained to drive forklift.
I think I have to prove myself to myself first. Yeah, that I could do it. And then my employers would see that I could do it.
Working here, working in Jamaica, the difference is like the money. That is a huge difference, right? So when you have $1 a year, you have $97 back home in Jamaica. So when you have $1,000 here, it's $97,000 back home. So that make a big difference, right?
Like that is like, it's like when people from Nova Scotia go to Alberta. Like they leave here, go to Alberta and make big money. Same with the guys from Jamaica. So it's like this awesome opportunity for them to make a bunch of money.
It's a better standard of living overall.
Acabé mi casa, hice una sala con mármol, forré mi baño de mármol, compré una sala, un refrigerador y pues le hice sus sueños a mi hija, ¿no? Unos 15 años que ella tanto quería, y gracias a Dios, pues ya trabajo de Canadá, pues le hice su sueño a mi hija.
Thanks to this job here in Canada, he finished his house, and he gave his daughter her dream, which was has to have his big party of 15 years old. That's like a dream for every 15-year-old girl. And many fathers start saving for that since they are babies, since the daughters are babies.
On our team here, his name is Bobby, and his wife had called him earlier that week saying that the textbook bill had come in, and it was quite extravagant. It was going to be like 40,000 Jamaican dollars.
She texted me for the cost for the book list.
Okay, hello and welcome to Council and Committee meeting for March 10th, 2020. I'd like to remind everyone that our meetings are web streamed and televised. For those in attendance, I would ask you to ensure your phones are on silence mode. Thank you to our camera volunteer, Ryan Wallace, for being with us today. And Mayor Chop and Councillor Huffman are not attending today's meeting. They send their regrets. Councillor Huffman is away on bereavement, and on behalf of committee and council, we send heartfelt condolences to her and her family at this time. So disclosure of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations? Seeing none. Approval of the agenda or changes to the agenda. Are there any changes? Councillor Van Passen.
Could I pull consent item A, please?
Sure. Councillor Micheli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would request that we pull item 3C and 3E from the consent items, please.
Sure. A, C, and E pulled from consent. Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder to approve? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you. Through you, I would also like to pull 3D. So I think in total we got A, C, D, and E are being pulled.
Okay. Perfect. Seeing nothing else, can I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Councillor Taylor, Councillor Columbus, and all in favor? That's carried. Please note the Deputy Clerk advised that pages 19 to 21 should be following staff report HSS 20-10. We've already done our consent items. Be enough? I think. Ian just did that one too. Okay. So we'll need a mover and a seconder that consent items B and F be approved as follows. Councillor Micheli. Councillor Rabbits. All in favor? Carried. Thanks. Okay. So presentations are set to begin at 3. A reminder to our presentations today that you have 10 minutes to present, followed by questions of committee. Extensions may be granted by a majority vote of members in attendance. And I believe that our representatives from Parsons have requested a little bit of additional time. So is there a council or a committee member interested in moving? Councillor Micheli, seconded by Councillor Van Passen. And all in favor? Carried. Okay. So let's call up representatives from Parson to present on the causeway and replacement of the bridge over Big Creek. Come up to the podium there and just hit the button on the microphone, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Ariane Caux. I'm the Deputy Project Manager with Parsons for this project. I have with me today Sonia Aliwalia, the Project Manager for Parsons, Dwayne and Daryl with Ellis, who are leading our structural engineering effort, and Kim Arnold with Parsons leading the environmental permitting effort for this project. We would like to present an update on the project to Council today, talk briefly about some of the construction impacts that we're foreseeing as a result of this project, status of the utilities, and provide an update on the status of environmental permits and approvals. The design schedule is on the screen in front of you. We have completed the geotechnical investigations and reporting, the 30% designs for the bridge and roadway, the 60% design for the bridge and roadway approaches, and all of those submissions have been reviewed by the county. Upcoming design submissions include the 90% bridge design in April, bridge design tender package in May, and the roadway design. You will note that the 60% roadway design is currently on hold due to environmental permitting and approvals. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We are looking at construction hopefully in fall 2020. Our design schedule does allow us to get to construction at that date. Again, that is contingent on environmental permits and approvals, which Kim will be touching on in a few minutes. We wanted to share with you some of the aesthetic features that we're introducing in the design. So the bridge will feature a concrete patterned parapet wall, similar to the image that's on the screen. We are allowing provisions for lighting to be installed at a future date. We are currently following the county standards for street lighting, which are the Cobra head style typical street lights. If decorative lighting is desired by the county, please let us know so that we can factor that into our calculations. We would need to consider options like shielding, though, to prevent light spillover into the more sensitive areas neighboring the bridge. In terms of utilities, we had a kickoff meeting late last year with Hydro One, Bell, and Bridge Gas and Execulink Telecom to discuss the project. We had a site meeting earlier this afternoon with Hydro One to discuss some pole relocations, and we've initiated their relocation procedure to get that work started. We are also in discussions with Bell, who share a utility trench with Hydro One currently in this corridor. But please note that this relocation work and any relocation work that is required in order to get this project started and in the ground is also contingent on the environmental permitting and approvals for this project. The Stage 4 archaeological assessment kicked off in the fall of last year. ASI is our consultant doing all of this work in the field. They were able to excavate 85 block units of approximately 1 square meter on the west side of the causeway. They have been analyzing the artifacts they have found to date and are beginning the compilation of their reporting. They'll be resuming their fieldwork in the spring once the ground thaws out and dries up, with approximately 237 square meter block units remaining for excavation. We don't anticipate that the archaeological work will cause any delays to construction for the bridge. We've also negotiated monitoring agreements with 3 of the First Nations in the area, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee Development Institute, and 6 Nations of the Grand River. One of the commitments that was made during the EA and in the environmental study report included commemorative and educational plaques. We are waiting for some feedback from county heritage staff on the plaques, including content and locations. The first one being a commemorative plaque for the existing bridge structure, the second one being an interpretive plaque, an educational plaque in partnership with the Dr. Jerome Catchin Waterfowl Foundation. So these are still under development. In terms of construction staging, we're looking at 2 stages of construction. The first one being the construction of the west side of the new structure outside of the existing roadway, so there would be no impacts to the existing traffic. We'd be able to maintain 1 lane in each direction. In stage 2, the traffic would be shifted into a single lane on the new structure with signals to monitor and allow traffic to pass. Access to William Lane, Hugh Lane, and George Lane would be maintained through stage 1. In stage 2, we would require closure of George Lane due to the proximity to the bridge. Unfortunately, access is not possible through the laneway with the demolition of the existing structure. There is a private laneway just south of there that we anticipate could be used for access in the meantime. Please note that the construction staging is still a conceptual plan, and these may change once the contractor is on board, depending on their methodologies. We're also looking at requesting a temporarily lowered speed limit during construction from 60 kilometers an hour to 50 kilometers an hour through this area, just to improve safety as well as allow better traffic flow with the construction vehicles in the area during stage 2. With the closure of George Lane, we would also like some input from the county on whether they would be willing to consider payment for maintenance or restoration of the private laneway for George Lane due to the closure. As I mentioned, we're looking at requesting a temporary speed limit reduction through the area, especially during stage 2 when we are down to 1 lane of traffic. The speed limit there is 60 or 70 kilometers an hour, depending on whether you're north or south of the bridge. We'd look at reducing the speed limit to 50 kilometers an hour for about a 1 kilometer stretch, 500 meters on either side of the bridge. In terms of property impacts, we have completed the boundary survey in January, and reviewed the impacts of the property boundaries against the right-of-way and the roadway alignments. We did not see that any of the existing structures are within the clear zone of the roadway, the clear zone being measured from the edge of the traveled lane, not the edge of pavement. Clear zone should be kept free of obstructions and roadside hazards. We have not finished the detailed design in this area. There may be some impacts to ditching and drainage with the structures, but we'll look into those a little bit further as the design progresses. In terms of surveying, we do kindly request consideration of payment for additional effort regarding the surveying to address some potentially costly risks during construction for claims for different fill quantities or variances in fill quantities from what we are estimating now to what would actually be required once they get into the field. This is spawned mostly because of the conditions of the causeway at the bridge. It is very marshy, very wet in that area, and unfortunately the alignment was not nailed down during the EA phase. It does take until 30% design and detailed design to nail down the alignment, so the extent of the survey was not fully known when the proposal was put together. We are requesting an extra $6,000 to cover this cost. We can make assumptions in terms of where the existing ground is and design based on those assumptions, but as I mentioned, this does raise the risk of potentially costly claims during construction to bring in additional fill. Further to the surveying, we do recommend completing additional test pits or boreholes in the area to look at the soil and the amount of stripping that may be required to create a more stable road bed in that area. Again, we can make assumptions. The geotechnical report does provide recommendations on how to stabilize the soil in this area. However, without having some more boreholes in the area of the bridge, we don't have a lot of information on how much fill would need to be brought in or what measures would need to be executed to improve our confidence in the construction cost estimates that we'd be providing. So I'm going to turn this over to Kim, who's going to speak to our permitting and approvals process, so what we've completed to date and what our next steps are.
Hello everyone. My name is Kimberly Arnold. I am a senior environmental planner as well as a project manager at Parsons. So I'm going to be discussing some of the items with respect to the environmental permits and approvals. So we actually provided a permit and approval acquisition plan to Norfolk County back in October, and we identified all of the permits that you see on the screen. This from various agencies, federal and provincial agencies. And moving forward, I won't go over all of them right now, but going forward, I would like to in particular talk about 3, which are the long lead items or the ones that are on the critical path of this project. So the first one is with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, MECP, which is the Endangered Species Act permit, the Species at Risk Act permit under the Environment and Climate Change Canada, under the CWS, Canadian Wildlife Service, and the Fisheries and Oceans. The permit there is the Species at Risk Compliant Fisheries Act authorization. Okay. I think I jumped a slide. There we go. Yeah. So I first want to talk about a couple of agency concerns, and the first is with respect to this term called critical habitat, which I'm going to explain. So this is a federal term, and federally, critical habitat is habitat that's necessary for the survival or recovery of a species at risk. And it actually is afforded an additional level of protection. And on this particular site, on the west side of the causeway and the bridge, is considered to be critical habitat for numerous species. And the point here is that DFO has never authorized a SARA-compliant Federal Fisheries Act authorization for the destruction of critical habitat. And we are actually going to be destroying about 1,500 square meters. So this is setting a bit of a precedent, but DFO has agreed that because of the safety issues, they are going to move us forward with a permit for the bridge. The issue here is that because the causeway would remove 15,000 square meters, DFO has come back and said they would like to separate the project, so we'll move forward with the bridge and come back to discuss the causeway. And in order for DFO to potentially provide a permit to construct the causeway, there's going to be some, excuse me, several items that they're going to want to know, and the first of which is the proof that their widening is actually required. And there'll also be a detailed review of alternatives as opposed to the specific widening that has been recommended in the environmental assessment. So we will be discussing this further with DFO and the other agencies, and we anticipate to start that discussion in the summer of this year. So another agency concern is with respect to lighting. The provisions for lighting on this project is that they will be installed at a later date. And MECP, which is a provincial body, has stated that they're concerned about the lighting and the spillover of the light into the natural areas, so outside of the roadway. So at this point, in the Endangered Species Act permit, MECP will be providing conditions for that lighting, but one of the key items here is that how will it be enforced when it actually is done at a later date. So we've got ongoing discussions with MECP on that item as well. Okay, so with respect to the schedule of the permits and approvals, a lot of these, in particular these 3 permits and approvals that I've highlighted, there are some legislated timelines. Some of them have a 90-day review period for different aspects. There's different submissions that need to be done in order to obtain the permit. And sometimes, in certain instances, there's 60-day review period for the agencies, as well as a 90-day depending on the permit and depending on what the step that we're in. Therefore, it is resulting in an overall schedule of 12 to 18 months to actually obtain these permits and approvals. So it's anticipated then we should receive the permits by about the fall of 2020 or just a bit later than that. So we've had ongoing discussions with these agencies since September, and we meet with them monthly, but we also are actually having further discussions with individual agencies to try to expedite this process and to move it forward accordingly. So with respect to the deliverables, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, we've already provided several submissions to the agencies in order for them to determine even if we need a permit and approval, and also what species we need to include in the permit and approval. So even before we can apply, there's a lot of ongoing discussions prior to. If you look on the left-hand side, we've got the deliverables in progress. And I want to highlight the 2 bullets at the end. So the ESA permit, which is the provincial permit for fisheries, and the SARA permit for fisheries, which is the federal permit. We have been requested to do additional field work in the spring to characterize the habitat, the fisheries habitat that is just below the bridge and to the west of the bridge that we will be impacting. So this is therefore, there's some implications then to the delivery of the actual application. And so we will be providing the application to the agencies for those 2 permits in June of 2020 when the field work is complete. In terms of next steps, now with all of these permits and approvals for both federal and provincial, we have to determine offsetting and compensation. And so that is what we do when we remove the critical habitat. We have to make new critical habitat. And there's actually a relatively lengthy negotiating process with the agencies to make sure that we are actually going to be providing the habitat where they think it should be done, and we have to make sure that it's going to be effective and it will be for the long term as opposed to a short term. So we're in the process of doing that at this moment. Again, we will be doing the aquatic habitat assessment in the spring of this year. With respect to all the other permits and approvals that you saw on the previous slide, we will be providing the applications into those agencies within the next few weeks, month or so, to get those permits moving forward, but they are not on the critical path. Another item that has come up with the federal and provincial agencies with respect to species at risk is installing turtle exclusionary fencing for nesting, which turtles will nest on the shoulder of that road. So what we plan on doing is we plan on making an exclusionary area where the turtles can't go in, just in case we can start construction in the summer, early and fall. So that's a contingency measure that we're going to be implementing. Okay, so all of that said, we do have a contingency if the timelines are not going to meet County of Norfolk's anticipated deadlines. So there is a potential for both federal and provincial permits to obtain what's called essentially an emergency permit. And if it is proven that there is imminent danger to human health or safety, they will provide us with an approval to proceed. It doesn't mean that we still can't meet, we have to meet the conditions of the permit and approval, and we have to meet the offsetting compensation, which will be done after the project. We will still have to negotiate that and implement that during construction, but they will award, if deemed necessary, they will award approval to proceed with the construction. So if it is approved by the county, we will proceed with that discussion with the agencies. So there has been additional effort required to acquire these permits and approvals, and we have been we have been doing a lot further work in order to obtain these permits and approvals. Essentially, there is discussions, as I mentioned, with respect to the offsetting compensation measures, but the overall effort of that has yet to be determined because we're mid-negotiations. There's been additional field work, as I've mentioned. There will be additional field work with the fisheries assessment, but during the winter we did actually have to do some additional terrestrial assessment to characterize the habitat on the site itself. There has been a change in legislation. There is a new Canadian Navigable Waters Act, so it will require a permit under that act. That was not part of our initial bid. In addition, this installation of turtle exclusionary fencing is also something that needs to be done according to the agencies. That was not part of our proposal. However, we are tracking our effort under the original budget and will notify the Norfolk County of any potential overruns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions of committee to the presenter? Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was mention of closing George Lane. How long will that George Lane be closed, or is that a permanent closure?
It would be a temporary closure for the stage 2 construction. And Dwayne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's a few months, 4 months, 6 months, something like that. They do have the private laneway just south of there that may potentially be utilized for access to that property. As I mentioned previously, we do recommend that the county consider restoration measures for that laneway following construction as a courtesy to the property owner to put up with the construction.
But while it's closed, there will be provision for parking for those residents that are on George
They
Lane.
would still be able to access the laneway just from the southern access and have use of the entire laneway there.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You talked about the emergency permit and the need for some offsetting. Is that like offsetting by creating the same habitat somewhere else?
Exactly.
The county, I think, partially is involved with the ALICE program. The Nature Conservancy, the Canada Wildlife Service are doing a bunch of habitat restoration along the whole of the lower Big Creek thing and dealing with the Phragmites. Aren't we doing enough already down there? Like, can't you sort of throw that in as part of the negotiations that we're working on it already ahead of the game?
So the agencies require specific offsetting for these specific species. And some of the work that is being done, I'm not 100% sure we can inquire, but most of that work is not for those specific species. So we have to make new habitat. We are in discussions with locations around Big Creek with CWS, the Canadian Wildlife Service, yes. Awesome.
Councillor Michelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies, will the county be informed at some reasonable time ahead of any kind of problems that you might have with this alternative turtle fencing or any of that type of thing? What I'm trying to avoid is some kind of, we get the information about something that needs to be changed or we need to add to, and we get it on a really short time frame, and we are kind of trying to get ahead of some of this. So I'm hoping that we won't get any last minute requests for additional funding that you don't believe are part of the project that you originally proposed at the very last minute. So I just kind of, first of all, want to just ask if we can kind of keep that in mind, that the council would need to be informed as soon as possible about any changes like that.
Of course. We do meet bi-weekly with our counterparts at the county. They do participate in the conference calls with the environmental agencies as well, and we will definitely keep council at the forefront of those discussions and make sure that you are kept apprised of the happenings on the project.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. When you were showing the diagram in the PowerPoint here of the structures that are on the causeway, and I don't know, can you go back to that? That would be great if you did.
Yep.
It's the ones that are part of the clear zone.
Oh, at the south end of the...
Yes, the ones at the south end. I believe it looks to me like from the picture that that's right beside the location of the marina in Long Point.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So just to clear this up, and I know for the benefit of those people watching at home, I think you mentioned that as it stands right now, those structures would not be in jeopardy of having to be moved. Is that correct?
That's correct. They are not considered roadside hazards and would not need to be relocated.
Okay. Except that you mentioned the caveat that unless there is some kind of drainage problem or some kind of water alleviation issue.
I don't believe the structures would need to be relocated for ditches. I believe that we can find an engineering solution around it. It's just not something that I have a lot of detail on at the moment. We haven't developed the ditch design in that area.
I see. Thank you. So, because this is obviously, as you are aware, an item of concern for those businesses that operate in that area. So I think that they'll be quite happy to hear that. And Madam Chair, if I can pursue this. Also, just for clarity, because I'm not sure that we have had a definitive answer to this question, are we reconstructing that entire road from the beginning, or are we going to conduct what is referred to as a shave and pave?
So that ties into environmental permits and approvals. As Kim mentioned, the environmental agencies are still deliberating on the destruction of critical habitat associated with the causeway reconstruction work, which is about 15,000 square meters. One of the steps that we will need to take with the environmental agencies is do another thorough review of the alternatives considered during the EA and look at ways to minimize the impact to critical habitat. At this stage, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, the roadway design component is currently on hold until we have some more discussions with the environmental agencies and have a clear path forward on how to progress the design of the causeway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with respect, just sort of connected to that, what about the the way we're going to deal with the existing trees on the causeway?
Some of them will need to be removed, unfortunately, because they are located within the clear zone, so within that tolerance from edge of driven lane. We can look into replanting trees along the causeway outside of the clear zone to compensate for that loss. We are reviewing impacts to habitat due to tree removal, for example, bat habitat and snag trees. I don't have an exact number for you at this time on how many trees will need to be removed, but it will be some. Okay.
I'm just asking, and I realize that this is maybe something that we also need to get more of the environmental impact studies for, but I am just kind of a little bit concerned that the removal of some of those very large trees could have a very significant impact on the entire roadbed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just, and I realize that that's the reason we have to do that, but I just wanted to kind of get that out there about, that as obviously you're aware, and I think everyone now is very aware, that this is an extremely complex project with a whole bunch of moving parts. Not only parts, but also different agencies involved, and we have to kind of bring them all together.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know that you were mentioning several of these agencies that we require approval from. It's my impression just from listening to you, and thank you very much for your presentation. This is very helpful. I've been very, very anxious to have you come back. It's very nice to see you. But I am getting the impression that it's sounding like these approvals could delay the hopeful fall 2020 construction start. Would that be fair to assume?
It is definitely a possibility. As Kim mentioned, the timelines for their reviews can be quite lengthy, but it is why we submitted our permit and acquisition plan to try and get ahead of this permitting process, do what we can to start discussions early, get the agencies on board with the project goals, the county's goals, and get to construction within a reasonable timeline.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'll give my colleagues an opportunity. Thank you.
Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions here. Over the past year, 2019 and into 2020, we have experienced in the past some of the highest water levels in the history of Lake Erie. And we're going to, from what I've been hearing from some of the speakers making presentations from the LPRCA and other jurisdictions, that's going to continue into 2020 with real high water levels. So have those high water levels not impacted the critical habitat of species? Like, sure to God, if the water level went up 22 inches or something, that must have impacted the species that were originally there. That's my first question.
Yes, it does. The changing water levels does impact the critical habitat. In terms of the, because it's Mother Nature,
so
there's no recourse. Yeah.
For Mother Nature to do it, it's okay, I guess, but for humans to do it, it's not. My second question, how is that high water table going to impact the cost of reconstruction of that bridge that's so important to remedy?
I don't believe the water level will have an impact on the bridge construction itself. We will be installing cofferdams and dewatering those to put in the piers and abutments. They would have to be tall enough, obviously, to keep out the water level and its fluctuations, but there shouldn't be an impact cost-wise to the reconstruction. In terms of LPRCA's concerns about the rising water levels, I understand that was brought up in the EA. They had recommended raising the causeway about 1 meter in grade. That was reviewed in the environmental study report, and it was settled on a profile raise, but less than 1 meter to mitigate the significant impacts to the neighboring lands and critical habitat due to raising it by 1 meter. For example, if we did follow through with that, all of the laneways at the bridge would need to be closed to accommodate the profile.
Thank you for that.
If I could just build on that, and then I will pass it back over to committee members. I was going to ask a similar question with regards to the high water levels and flooding, but my question was going to be more driven to concerns over the quality of the structure. The structure is compromised already. Is there any concern there when we're anticipating additional flooding and high water for the spring and the summer? Certainly cost is a factor, but so is safety. And in tandem with that, why not apply for this structure as an emergency permitting option when it's the only way in and out for community members, and it's in such dire shape anyways? Why not just go right for those permits and try and keep this moving along as quickly as we can?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're here, to get that specific direction, to allow us to go ahead and start the discussions with the agencies about this emergency permit and approval. Yeah, we will, as I mentioned in my presentation, there is some specific documentation that we are going to need to prove that. The agencies need to know that this is, there's an imminent safety issue.
Okay, thank you. And so higher than normal flooding, are you concerned that these high water levels are already chipping away at a compromised structure?
I don't believe so, no. And we are doing everything we can to progress the design to get that complete and ready for construction as soon as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was actually going to be my question. You need approval from council to go ask for that. Have you got a draft of the wording exactly as you would like it to get that, so that when you're done with your presentation, we can make that motion and get that process rolling?
No, not.
No. Maybe our Director of Public Work can start thinking about what wording he would need for that, so when we're done, we can get that on the floor.
Councillor Michelli, yep.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And so we would want to incorporate both of those aspects that the Chair mentioned and Councillor Van Passen, that not only are we dealing with the high water issue, in many respects, the bridge has been a safety concern for at least 18 months now. We've made a bunch of Band-Aid repairs to it, as you know. So we would want to couple the emergency permit request with the high water and with the fact that this is the only access for the people who live in Long Point to get back and forth. So if this is about the safety of human beings and also wildlife, I think that those two parts of that would have to be included in our wording. Madam Chair, thank you. And also, you mentioned earlier during the presentation that to obtain some of these approvals, there will be a requirement to have proof that the roadway needs to be widened. And I'm just asking this for clarification. Is that including the concept of adding bike lanes to the causeway?
So the concept that has been discussed with the agencies is that of the agreed upon EA cross-section, which includes the paved bike lanes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, so another request for direction was regarding $6,000 for additional surveying. Would you just dive into what that additional surveying is a little bit deeper than from the presentation there?
Yeah, let me just bring up the figure there. So as you can see in that bottom image, that cross-section, there's a blue line and a red dashed line. The cross-section currently hovers over the existing ground. There is no connection, which is what that blue line symbolizes. The additional survey information that we're looking for would make up the red dashed line, so we could complete the slope design on the west side of the causeway. That information is quite difficult to obtain in that marshy area. It's a lot of effort. It's taking a little bit longer than we had anticipated. So,
thank you.
I don't believe, I'm looking over to staff, I don't believe you'd need that direction from us for the $6,000. And I think if it hits our minutes, Mayor Chop might revisit the wrong environmental assessment that we first applied for and wonder why we're paying additional funding to Parsons at this time, so maybe we just leave it with Mr. Godby. It's probably best. Councillor Van Passen.
Madam Chair, I just assume that you're not just going to dump gravel on slop unless you know what's under the slop. That's
No.
what you need the boreholes for?
Yeah, one of the requirements in the geotechnical report is to make sure that the soil is adequately stabilized before you build on top of it. Part of that is you have to strip off the organics in the topsoil first, and the boreholes would tell us how much and the thickness of the organics in the topsoil approximately we would encounter, whether it's a few inches or a few feet. There's a big variance in there, especially because of the marsh. We're not very confident on the information that we have currently. Like I said, the exact extent of the roadway in terms of its width was not known at the time of the EA when our proposal was put together. This is information that we're finding out as we develop the design and refine the limits of the grading. Unfortunately, that's how design goes. We've tried to foresee as much of this as we can in the proposal. But we would like to do a little bit of extra work now to save a lot of potential extra costs during construction.
That would be my suggestion, that you find out what's there, because that could make millions of dollars of difference if they find they have to dig out 20 feet of swamp to put it with a solid base as opposed to digging out 20 inches. It's a big variable down the road, so better to spend a little bit of money now to find out what's underneath there. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just a question about the lighting. You said that we had the option of having decorative lighting. That would be sort of up to the county to have that type of lighting on the bridge. But also lighting is another issue with regard to the species at risk and wildlife preservation, because some of them are light sensitive. Mm-hmm. Is there, for lack of a better description, sort of a turtle-friendly lighting that we can use for this type of thing, that we won't have to worry too much about the lighting, that will also provide enough light to make the bridge safe for motorists?
Yeah, so there is there's lighting where there's shields, so it would be shielded and the light would spill only onto the road, and the other sides it would be shielded, and that is something that MECP is looking, the agencies are looking for. But yes, you can definitely do that. And also there's no spill going up to the sky as well because of bats. So it would be shielded probably on all sides, but maybe 1.5 on 2. Does that make sense with my my hand gestures?
We're also looking at, in our calculations, we do these light spill patterns. You can see exactly where the light fall is. So we wouldn't choose bulbs that have incredible ranges, right? We're trying to minimize it so only the areas that need lighting would be lighted. When I mean decorative fixtures is also just the shape of the fixture itself. If you don't want the standard Cobra lighting on the bridge, just in terms of aesthetics, both would likely have to be modified to ensure that the agencies are happy with the solutions that would be implemented. I think the concern more was with regard to enforcing the conditions of the permit at a later date, because the lighting will not be installed with this project. We're just allowing for the concrete bases and the conduits to go in now, so when lighting does get implemented in the future, it's quite easy to bolt the poles in place and call it a day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I have too many more questions, ladies, and thank you very much for your time and your responses here today. I would like to ask, though, that you keep in touch with our General Manager of Public Works as closely as possible, and just keep him updated as much as you can so that he can relay that information to myself and my colleagues in a timely fashion, so that we're kind of up to date, because as each passing month goes by, obviously all of this is starting to come together, and it's going to be kind of like the Super Bowl of municipal projects, as you know. So I want to make sure that we're all on board with the information as it comes. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Can we have a mover? Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation as information? Councillor Geisens, Councillor Taylor, and all in favor? And that is carried. And then I'm looking to my colleagues if there's any direction. Councillor Van Passen.
Could I just ask Jason whether he's got some wording for a motion potentially to allow us to ask for emergency repairs and get this done as quickly as possible.
Through the chair to Councillor Van Passen, I very quickly have something here that doesn't, I'm not quite satisfied with the integration of the high water levels and limited access and such, but essentially that Parsons be directed to initiate the emergency permit approval process relating to the species at risk permits required for the replacement of the bridge over Big Creek. That would effectively get the message out that you're looking for. However, it's not really something that's also reinforcing the importance of our concerns about the high water levels in Lake Erie or the limited access to and from the point. So on that note, I guess procedurally, we could look at getting something like that drafted perhaps by the end of this meeting, or even for the meeting on the 24th, since it'll need to be ratified by council at that point anyways, but it's something we can work on a little stronger wording on, even with in conversation maybe with Parsons as well. So
Because I'd be happy to second that motion, get it done, and as you say, we can amend it at the council meeting if need be, and because I'm sure Councillor Michelle would love to move that motion.
I would, Madam Chair.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Michelle, seconded by Councillor Van Passen. Is there any further discussion? No? Okay, and all in favor? And that is carried, and we can finesse that a little bit at council. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we now have One Fund. The representatives from One Investment would like to present on the Legacy Fund, and they also require an extension. So is there a mover and a seconder to allow for Councillor Taylor? The seconder, Councillor Rabbits, and all in favor for an extension? That is carried. Okay, great. Thank you for coming. Just hit the button on your microphone there.
Great. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of Council. On behalf of One Investment, I want to thank you for this opportunity to bring you up to speed on the Norfolk County Legacy Fund. So what I want to cover today is a little bit of an overview on the One Fund, or One Investment, talk a little bit about municipal investments in terms of both the legal structure as well as some diversification strategy. Finally, some background on the Norfolk County Legacy Fund, and then talk a little bit about returns. So who is One Investment? One Investment is a nonprofit organization that is jointly owned by LAS, which is a company of Association of Municipalities of Ontario, or AMO, as well as CHUMS, which is a subsidiary of Municipal Finance Officers Association, or MFOA. One Investment offers turnkey investment solutions to the municipal sector. I want to talk a little bit about our service delivery model because it's actually based on the work that we have done with Norfolk County. So on the top, it looks at 3 partners that actually are very critical for municipal investing. The first is Council's priorities and objectives. It's understanding what you need from a community as well as an investment perspective. Once that is defined, it looks at your municipal staff to help look at your municipal financing and your cash flow, and that will become evident why cash flow is so important in the next couple of slides. Finally, once you have those pieces, it's turned over to One Investment. We provide the investment advice. And actually with me, I have Keith Taylor. He's the investment manager for One Investment. For those of you that were with us in previous presentations, we had consultants. We have actually brought the investment expertise in-house, and now it's part of the offerings to all municipalities, not just Norfolk County. So I want to start by talking about 2 ways of investing. Municipal investments are really covered under 2 areas. One is the Municipal Act, and the second is Ontario Regulation 43897. What I'm going to do is actually focus on the legal list side of the business, and that is basically a prescribed list of investments that municipalities are allowed to invest in. The second half is relatively new. It's called the Prudent Investor Regime, and there's some very specific rules around it. Currently, the only municipality in Ontario investing under the Prudent Investor Regime is actually the City of Toronto. So let's talk a little bit about the legal list. The legal list is very conservative, it's very risk adverse, it's very much a rules based. So when you look at the world of investing, the legal list really narrows that group down. It's not like municipalities can invest whatever they want. There's a set of rules. And in fact, we've provided a short version of it to staff. It's over 12 pages long with all the compliance. So though it appears easy, it's actually quite complex. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the restrictions and on municipal investing that's included in the Ontario regulation. So as I mentioned, it's very, very conservative, looking at items such as government bonds, bankers' deposits, and bankers' acceptance. Bank deposits, sorry. And the institutional ratings actually range from AAA to A-. Another example of some of the restrictions might be timeframes. For example, if you're dealing with corporate bonds, municipalities can invest directly in corporate bonds, but the maturity date has to be less than 5 years. Once you get over 5 years, the only way you can invest in corporate bonds greater than 5-year maturity is actually through one investment. Regardless, they have to have a minimum security rating of A-. The last item is Canadian equities are available to municipalities, but they can only invest in Canadian equities through one investment. And I just want to highlight a little bit of a nuance. If you notice, we use the word Canadian equity. This is not the TSX. It actually has to be a Canadian company. So you can actually have a US that's listed on the TSX. That's some of the nuances. We've actually defined a Canadian equity as having a Canadian head office. So this is when we talk about the complexity and the restrictions associated with the legal list. These are some examples going forward. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the offerings by one investment on the legal list. This chart does a comparison of investing from February of 2019 to February of 2020. There's a total of 179 municipalities and boards that are invested in one investment, and at that time, there was a total of $2.1 billion invested. Now, before I start explaining some of these products, what I want to mention is that all investments with one investment are completely liquid. You can buy and sell them any day of the week. But as we go along, when you actually look at the investment time frame, from left to right, it goes from very short investment time frames to very long in the equity fund. So the first one is the HISA that is shown there, and that actually stands for a high interest savings account. This is simply a bank account. It's used for very short-term investments, often associated with your operating budget. For example, you get the payment from taxpayers. You might have surplus funds. You might want to put them in there till you have cash flow needs. That would be where would you park them. When we look at the equity fund, it's a much longer investment time frame, probably looking upwards of 5 years. So this chart is slightly hard to see. Hopefully you can see it on your own sheets in front of you. This is an example of what we use to explain cash flow. So this is looking at data on the TSX, so no investment managers, from January of 1956 to February 2020. And I'm referring actually to the first column where it says year 1 here. So this column, what it looks at is data on a 1-year rolling average. So a 1 year would be, for example, January 56 to December of 56 would be 1 year. February of 56 to January of 57 would be another 1-year rolling period. So when you look at this time frame of 1956 to 2020, there have actually been 758 1-year rolling periods. Of that time, 200 of those 1-year rolling periods, or almost 26%, you would have a negative return. The highest return would be about 86%, and the lowest return would be a loss of negative 39%. and the average would be 10.3%. So when you think about putting investment for a year, you almost have a 1 in 4 chances of having a loss. So I like to call this kind of approach a zero or hero. You could do really well, but you could also do very poorly. If we go over to the third column from the right, we look at a 7-year rolling period. So for example, this would cover January of 1956 to December of 62. That would be a 1-year rolling period. Another rolling period would be February of 56 to January of 63, for example. So in that, we have 686 7-year rolling periods. And if you notice, at no point in time has there been a negative loss in that 7-year period. The highest return is 21%, and the lowest is just under 2%. And the average return is about 9.4%. When you're starting to invest in the equity market, what this means is that you're looking at a long-term investment. In other words, you don't want to be forced to take your money out when you have a loss. You want to be able to control when money goes in and also when it comes out. And that's where we talk about the investment category for equities is in the 5-year range, so you can control when money comes in and goes out. Matching cash flow with the investment type. Another strategy to use when you're looking at investing is called diversification. As you can see, this chart, you will see a series of green lines. That actually shows the returns of the equity market. As you can see, it swings quite volatile. It moves up and down a great deal. When you actually look at the red line, that actually shows the returns for the fixed income. As you can see, it actually is much more gentle. In other words, it doesn't give you very large returns, but it fluctuates so that you have a mix between the two products. The one issue, obviously, with the red line is the returns aren't very high. But if you notice as well, the green lines and the red lines work in opposition. So if you notice in general, when equity goes down, fixed income is high, and vice versa. So the peaks and valleys are somewhat opposite. So a balanced portfolio, or one that's better diversified, has both components to it. This next chart actually compares the one equity fund, which is shown in the solid blue line, as compared with the TSX, which is shown in the dotted gray. As you can see, in general, the dotted gray line tends to go down and higher. It seems to drop lower, as well as soar higher. The one equity fund is actually designed to be less volatile. What that means is it's actually designed for the municipal sector, because municipalities, one of their biggest concerns is preservation of capital. They don't want to, quote, lose money. But the concept of losing money, you have to be very careful. So I'm going to draw your attention to that first bottom dip. The one equity fund was actually started in 2007. Does anyone remember what happened in 2008 and 9? Yes. So it was actually, when I showed you that rolling 1-year period, the loss of negative 39% was in the 2008 and 2009 period. We actually had an investor that invested with one investment at the beginning of that product. What do you think that was worth in 2008 and 9? $500,000 actually dropped to $340,000. They didn't do anything because that's what you actually don't want to sell that. If you sold, they would have actually realized a capital loss of $160,000. They actually let it continue. With 18 months, that value had fully recovered. It was back to $500,000. Today, the range of value of that investment runs between $1.2 and $1.3 million. So that's to give you, it's a very long-term strategy that they're leaving money in. But it's just, again, to illustrate all the changes and the importance of having different pieces to your portfolio. Finally, the last slide really looks at performance of the one equity, which is shown in red, relative to the TSX, which is shown in black. So this actually looks at investing $10 million. If $10 million was invested at the beginning of the fund, in the TSX you would have $17 million, while the one portfolio would have about $26 million. As you can see, it does go up in value over time, but in general, as most equities do, they're positive. This also demonstrates the value of having a portfolio manager. They add additional value by having successful stock selections. So to date, what I've really talked about some of the history with regards to investing and the municipal structure. Now I want to turn our minds more to Norfolk County strategies. So I wanted to start a little bit by talking about your strategic plan about building solid foundations. It really focuses on fiscal sustainability. I love the language that you use because you're really talking about long-term financial planning. You're talking about multi-year capital and operating budgets. You're talking about asset management. It's a lot of the fundamental foundational pieces that you need, and one of the big pieces are actually the high rate of return on your investments. Again, I caution the use of those words because there are a great deal of limitations in the Municipal Act. So the next two slides that I look at, that I'm showing to you, are actually slides that were taken from the presentation that we did to Council in 2017 and 18. One of the important parts is understanding what the objectives of Council were. So the portfolio mix that we have showing here is basically 50% equity shown in green, as well as 50% fixed income, which are equally split between corporate bonds and the bond program reflected in both blue and yellow. How that investment mix was designed is one of the principles of one investment was that Norfolk County wanted to take out about $2.5 million per year, and that was to be indexed. That is going to be, and the investment mix was set so that the principal remaining, so originally it was $67.7 million, that would continue to grow each and every year so that you maintain the purchasing power. Basically, if you look at $1 million today versus 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, that $1 million buys less. So one of the fundamental principles was to leave money in that fund to continue to grow. This slide is very confusing. And I would like to walk you through it because it talks about, this is the slide that was actually presented to Council in 17 and 18, and it's a hypothetical example. What it assumes is if you started with $67.7 million when we started the One Equity Fund in 2007 and 8, how would that look today? Again, this is completely hypothetical. So the green lines actually show the value of the portfolio, starting with 67.7. And as you can see, it actually drops down, right? In 2008 and 9, that dip. The black dotted line actually shows the $67.7 million over the time period. And finally, the red line shows the $2.5 million, which is indexed annually, and the scale is actually on the right-hand side, not the left-hand side. So as you can see over time at the end, that regardless, you take out the $2.5 million indexed every single year, and at times the green bars actually fall below the dotted line. You actually have a principal that's under $67.7 million. But given that you're looking at a long-term strategy, it actually comes out to be positive again at the end of this plan. A very, very long-term strategy. So, where are we today? Well, actually, this is as of the end of January. So again, much like you were looking at before, the light green represents the value of the $67 million starting when it was invested in December. The dark green lines represent the amount, or namely $8.3 million that have been withdrawn from the fund cumulatively over time. And the black line actually represents the $67.7 million. The blue line actually is the right-hand scale, and it actually shows the returns on a rolling one-year basis. As you can see, when you're looking at short-term returns, they're going up and down quite drastically. But over time, it is a long-term growth strategy where the principal amount showing at the end of December is actually higher than the $67 million originally invested. Plus, you've taken $8.3 million out. So I want to end off by talking a little bit about fees. Investing is not cheap. If you have your own portfolios, you understand how much you pay for portfolio managers, custodial costs, legal, accounting, investment advice. And that's all the services that one investment provides to you, including a guaranteed compliance with the Municipal Act. We get quarterly reports from each one of our managers ensuring that they comply. For that, these are the basis points. 100 basis points as a point of reference actually equals 1%. And as you can see, as the products get more complex, the cost of the product actually increases. These are very much institutional fees. I'm sure if you were paying that in your own portfolio, you'd be quite happy. But that is, those are the cost of the portfolio for Norfolk County. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions and ask my colleague, Keith Taylor, to join us.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Any thoughts on what's happening the last month or so with respect to our investments?
Absolutely. I think given that you're 50% equities and the stock market, I believe, lost 10% yesterday alone, they are dropping. That is a fact of life. One of the things that we're looking at when we actually were looking with our portfolio manager on the equity side about some of the history, one of the things we could look at was actually what happened during SARS. So what happened during SARS is when you look at the onset of the first case of SARS, 3 months out, that market had dropped about 9.5%. By the 6-month mark, it had rebounded. I don't know with the journey. I think when you add on the issues with the oil, I think that there's a lot of political instability. It's hard to tell what's going to happen. The one thing I probably can tell based on historical is that it's going to come back.
I mean, one thing that's maybe worthwhile just to add on there, is that it's a diversified portfolio, and that cannot be understated. What happened in the market, particularly yesterday, it was a fun day. Actually, not very fun at all. But equities took it on the chin, and what happened? There was risk. There was fear in the market, and when there's fear, what do people do? They take money out of the risky stuff and put it into some places safe. Bonds did very well, and equities sold off. To use the U.S. markets as the example, year to date, the U.S. bond index, the Barclays aggregate, which is the most widely used U.S. bond index, was up 4.75% year to date, whereas the S&P was down a bit less than 14%. When you've got a little bit of each, it's like eggs in the basket. If one goes down, the other one not only holds its value, in a crisis, it actually goes up in value. So some of the losses are compensated by gains somewhere else. So that's a diversification I wanted to mention. You're not just in equities. The fact that you have bonds in the portfolio is an asset to itself, something that helps offset some of the volatility.
Thank you.
If I could just add something else. When you have a drop, the psychological thing is actually to sell. So with the one equity fund, with the decline in prices, we've actually had no redemptions. We've actually had municipalities put over $40 million into the equity fund over the last 2 to 3 weeks, since about February 20th when the prices started dropping. So they're reacting as they should, buy low, sell high.
If I could continue on that thought, the legacy portfolio that we have has fixed asset weights. That means when the equity market goes down, the weight of equities in your portfolios go down also. And when bonds go up, it means you're out of balance. So the next time we need to rebalance the fund, it's very likely we'll be forced to buy more of the equity and reduce the bonds. So there's an automatic equalizer there where you're forced to do exactly that. Buy that which has become cheaper and sell that which has become more dear.
Councillor Marcelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that last comment in mind, does the fund have the liquidity and the flexibility to take advantage of situations as occurred yesterday to perhaps pick up a lot more equities at a very, very low price?
So the actual determination of money coming in and out is actually municipalities. They can obviously manage within different shares within their own portfolio. So they have had an influx, as I said, of $40 million over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So they will be taking advantage of that.
If I could just add, sometimes the reactions of individuals may be counterintuitive. And when there's fear, when you burn your finger, you take it out of the fire. And in the market, that's not what you want to do. You want to make sure you stay in the game. This particular mandate doesn't try to be tactical. It doesn't try to outsmart the market, because the market professionals who are paid to do this have, I wouldn't like to say that they're consistently wrong, but there's a lot of errors that happen, even with those that think that they know best. We don't try to outsmart the market. That automatic rebalancing I'm talking about, it's letting, basically you're setting the risk level. And then when the risk gets out of whack, you have too little equities and too much bonds, you snap back the risk to where it's supposed to be, and automatically you're actually buying that, which is cheaper.
Yes, so to follow that up then, so when we're referring to equities with that sort of not trying to outsmart the market, are we also talking about exchange-traded funds?
No, we're not. It's a matter of the municipal act itself. Municipalities simply can't buy those products. There are certain discrete things that the municipality is allowed to invest in, and it's dictated by legislation. So you'd think that would be appropriate, but unfortunately, mutual funds and ETFs are not allowable investments.
So just to clarify, and I appreciate your answer, because that's what I suspected. So they won't allow you to invest in, what are usually referred to as relatively safe market watching ETFs, but they will allow you to invest in some copper mine in northern Ontario. Is that?
I get what you're getting at, but the portfolio, there's only one way you can get equities under the Municipal Act, and that is specifically with the fund that we've designed, and it's designed specifically for the audience. As Donna was showing, when the market's really volatile, our fund is designed, the manager calls it a target risk mandate. They're lowering the risk. They built it basically for the audience, and it is less risk. In fact, the exposure in that portfolio to the energy sector and the materials sector is about half that in the TSX. And those sectors tend to be very cyclical and have sharp swings at the end of the market cycle. It's designed to take a little bit of that volatility out of the mix. So yeah, there is some miners in there. There are some energy companies in there, but a lot less than if you were buying an ETF that represented the TSX.
And so I'm assuming then with that in mind that there's a fair bit of financial equities as part of the fund.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's say that 2 weeks ago we started out where our projected thing is 50% equities and 50% bond, or 49% bond. That was 2 weeks ago. In 2 weeks, the equity markets tanked by 20%. What do you do to rebalance that ratio, or do you just let it sit and it'll come up by itself?
Oh, well, okay, this, as I say, this mandate, what we've done is we've set a ratio. This much equity and this much bonds. And on a regular basis, we'll review the positioning. If they move out of whack, if we start off with 50-50, if the equity markets drop down to 40, we would tell the appropriate people on your side to rebalance the fund and sell down some of the bonds to buy the equity. That's how it's done. And I encourage you not to look at your investments on that short of a time frame. These are investments for the long term. And honestly, It's one of those things you put it in the oven and you let it bake for a long, long time before it's done. If you're looking at it too closely, you can get false signals and react to things too quickly.
I couldn't have, Jerry. Yeah, like 2 weeks ago, we should have sold a bunch of the equities, and then now we should sell some bonds and buy the equities back, right? But that's not what the experts let us do. So, and my one other question was, you talked about how they calculate your fee, but you never told us what the fee is. So what was your fee from last year?
The fee was about $270,000. And included in that is actually all the portfolio management fees. So it's probably around the approximately 50 basis points-ish, depending on the value of the fund. Of course, the value is going to move over time, so depending on the valuation.
And the more we play with it, the bigger the fee would be, right?
No, the transactional fees associated with that are all the one investment. You are flat fee.
I was going to ask that as well. So just to be clear, full in, all management fees are at the 270.
Yes.
And what roughly percentage would that sit at?
Approximately 0.5%. It's baked into the fund fees itself, or the fund NAV, the valuations itself. So we're not charging you that, and you're writing us a check. It's taken out of the valuation of the fund.
Councillor Shelley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you're considering, obviously you don't have to think about this for bonds, but when you're considering equities, do you have like a sort of a standard time frame, a length that you are willing to hold equities or sell them, whichever?
So all of the investment decisions are actually made by portfolio managers. We do not influence that decision. The style of manager that we have for the Canadian Equity Fund is called growth at a reasonable price. So they will move stocks in and out of the portfolio as they seem fit. We set up a mandate for them to follow, and they make the investment decisions. So one investment is not making bond or equity decisions for you.
For the equity fund itself, typically the turnover, that is the number of securities that were sold and replaced, is somewhere in the range of 20% per annum. And they have analysts that looks at the securities, they look at the valuations, when they meet the targets, they sell them out, change things around. So, and that in the overall scope of things is relatively low. Just to take to answer from a different point of view, I brought you back to this slide, which is the investment horizon. And again, it comes, investing is for the long term, especially in equities. If you have a short time frame, like less than 5 years, you might not want to be in equities, because if you need that money in 5 years, there's a possibility you may be in a loss when you need to cash it out. For the legacy fund that you have, which is perpetual in nature, equities are a no-brainer, because you get the growth over time, and you can go through the periods when the equity markets are weak, and let the growth in the equities bring you back, bring the boat back up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it sounds like the portfolio managers are kind of blending some technical analysis in with some fundamental analysis when they're making these choices. Is that right?
Not really. Technical analysis, I mean, they are bottom-up stock pickers. They pick good companies with good prospects, good earnings growth. Technical analysis, typically for this type of a manager, is a timing issue. They've decided what to buy, and perhaps they might hold off a week or two to try to build a position at a lower value. But they're not going to be basing their decision based on the technical indicators. The decision to buy or hold is based on fundamentals.
Thank you. I feel a lot better now.
No, but that's exactly the case. That is exactly the case. They're buying good businesses at good prices, and they look at it in a portfolio context. So, you can have a really good a portfolio with really good companies that's highly volatile. And that's not what they do. It's not, yeah. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Columbus.
My question, thank you, Madam Chair. What does one investment provide to our finance department on a monthly or quarterly basis?
We provide a calculation of the returns over a 1 year and since inception. The other thing that we are working on as one investment, as I mentioned, we're bringing on prudent investor regime. We're looking at implementing a portfolio management system. So at that point, we'll be providing more robust quarterly reports. On an ad hoc basis, if we're requested, obviously, to a council or talking with them to help them understand what's going on or follow-up action needed.
So we have not been getting quarterly reports of late. We're just going to be getting them.
It's probably calculations. I'm hoping that in the first quarter or of 2020, but at least by Q2, because we are launching Prudent Investor and we're going to need those tools.
Okay. Look forward to that. Thank you.
So just so I have a clear understanding, when you're kind of handcuffed in a, well, the municipality is handcuffed with what we can and cannot invest in, so we're in a safe, comfortable relationship with the investment strategies we're in right now. But is it safe to say that when the market is doing exactly what it's doing, you're in the position that you take on that balancing approach as opposed to what other investment firms would offer? We're not able to participate in something kind of more aggressive in nature, so you're looking to balance out, like you spoke about earlier. Is that the approach that you?
So when we mean balancing, it's sorry, I'm just looking if I can. Ooh. When we talk about, doesn't seem to like me. Ugh. So when we talk about balancing, we're talking about this particular pie chart. So what has happened, for example, in the last 2 weeks, when you look at equities, they were set up to be 50-50. The equity portion now is going to get smaller, right, because it's lost money. The other side of it and then is going to get bigger. So when we talk about balancing, the ones that are earning more money, we are going to sell them. That way you realize gains.
I do understand that.
Okay.
I guess my question is more that you're not able to participate in other strategies that if we walked down the road and found someone to invest our funding with, we're not able to do those things. So.
Absolutely not. So what is generally available to the public is not generally legally allowed for municipalities if you're following the law. Now, that being said, Prudent Investor does allow you a great deal of more flexibility. There is a very complex governance regime associated with that some municipalities are finding unattractive.
And is it the practice of one investment to come every few years, or how often do you make visits to council?
When we are invited.
Okay, perfect. And so I guess my last question would be, we kind of gave, when I say we, the former council, is there a time in which, should this council reprioritize, that we must come to you, or is it an open-ended agreement where we're able to have that discussion? And
it's not that formal. Council always controls through the investment policy statement for you, obviously to meet your objectives.
Have you ever worked with a municipality that had some type of board or committee that was, community-led and driven, that provided some type of oversight to the investments at large?
Not really. I think one of the issues that are challenging for municipalities, and I'm going to speak from I'm an accountant, but being an accountant doesn't mean you know anything about investing. Investing is a very particular and specialty. And you really need people that really understand. In fact, with the Prudent Investor, as I mentioned, the governance structure is actually that all money investing beyond 18 months goes to a third-party committee that actually council and staff are restricted from sitting on. Again, investment advisors. So it's looking at a governance structure that is really made up of investment professionals that understand. So, so we haven't really worked with a community group. That doesn't mean that it's possible to have investment. Oftentimes, we are not presenting directly to council. It's to a council committee with an investment committee.
Yeah, that kind of something similar to what I was thinking of. I just didn't know if that was a common practice or
not really.
Create a bit of a buffer, I guess, like a safety net for council to communicate with the public at large about how we're doing and have the public at large have some stake in the game as well.
Well, I think it's worthwhile saying, if you will, The reason I was hired was to help add to the investment advice that's available to the community. So if there are those conversations going on, and there's need for input from a CFA, someone in the investment industry, I'm here to help. So please take me up on that offer.
And the one thing I do also want to mention is not only is there Keith, but there's something called an investment advisory committee that has actually 7 people that primarily have institutional investing experience that actually back Keith up. So they have in excess of 150 years of investment experience, primarily in pension and insurance businesses, as well as very large investment firms.
Great. Any further questions? Councillor Van Passen?
Just to follow up your question, somebody gave me some advice years ago that there's only 2 people in Canada that understand how to make money in investments, and those 2 people disagree with each other.
I'll remember that one.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming and presenting to us today. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation as information? Councillor Micheli, Councillor Taylor, and all of those in favor? And that's carried. Next. Okay, so it's almost 4:30 and deputations don't start until 5, so Deputy Clerk was just suggesting that maybe we go back to those consent items and start with the first one, which is staff report, consent item A, staff report FS 20-06.
Thank you, Chair Martin. To my right, I have Megan Souls. I'm not sure if everyone's met Megan. Megan is the accounting supervisor and I'm going to call her internal auditor. She's been instrumental in bringing financial statements in-house for Norfolk County and producing the FRI. And that has been completed on time for the last 2 years. Last year. It will be again this year. So with that, Megan will be providing you some history or some information on the council remuneration and expense report and answer any particular questions you do have.
All right, so the purpose of this report is to provide council with a statement of remuneration and expenses paid in 2019 to members of council and citizen appointees as required by the Municipal Act, and it's a requirement that this is presented by March 31st every year. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Van Passen?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted this pulled to make sure that everybody is aware that there'll be a big difference year over year because of changes that the province made by changing the way councillors can be paid. And the previous term of council, they made some adjustments in our paychecks to balance out that difference. And secondly, this is the entire expense, what it costs the taxpayer to have a councillor, as opposed to, like the sunshine list will be available soon. The sunshine list only includes the salary or wages paid to an employee. It doesn't include all the other things like mileage and conferences and everything. So, you know, the last year I cost the taxpayers, there you go, $45,963. That is the complete cost. It's not that plus. So if somebody looks at the records year over year, there's going to be a big jump just by the difference in accounting. And I thought I would bring that up, make sure everybody had that bit of information.
Perfect. Any other comments from council? Councillor Rabbits.
Thank you. Through you, I was hoping to have a bit of a breakdown on page 9. We have our boards and committees. I see there's a column for remuneration and also per diems. Can we just have a quick run through of what the remuneration would entail and also what a per diem is and what that would entail for for some of these boards. I'm interested in the Long Point Region Conservation Authority and Police Services Board in particular.
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Rabbits. So that's actually a good distinction and a good question. So, for example, the stuff that's in remuneration is typically something that is on payroll or an honorarium. So to me, the distinction would be is you get a payment for basically being on that board or attending. The per diems are typically tied to an event. So if you attend a meeting, you get a payment. So it depends on how many meetings and whatnot you attend. And that to me would be the distinction between the two.
Okay, thank you for that. So we do, in fact, in Norfolk County have some paid per diems for attending the Long Point Region Conservation Authority. I believe we had a committee meeting earlier, and that was a subject of some debate. But I also wanted to maybe draw it back to page 8, where we're looking at the remuneration of councillors. And, you know, it stands out to me that we do have a couple of councillors here, Councillor Roger Geisens, Councillor Kim Huffman, whose remuneration is visibly lower than their peer group. My question is, you know, what is the rationale as to that? Is that due to perhaps the size of the population that they are representing? My thoughts are that they're doing the same job that I am, regardless of how many constituents that they have, and it doesn't seem fair to me that they would be paid a different rate. And I was just wondering why that is.
You just lost your microphone over there, Megan, if you could just maybe.
My apologies. Typically, I'm a very loud talker. I'm surprised. Okay, so I will start again, just for clarification. So through Madam Chair to Councillor Rabbits, there is actually a bylaw that sets the remuneration for council. It sets the levels for the mayor, the deputy mayor, and councillors. That sets the salary piece. If you recall in the report, the remuneration figure, as Councillor Van Passen pointed out, does not just include salary, it includes other components. For example, it includes pension, CPP, EHT. So that would be the variances that you would typically see from councillor to councillor. Does that make sense to you? I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you. And for those that are long-serving, there's obviously be some more benefits and amounts accrued as opposed to someone who's new serving. But again, I just don't quite understand the, you know, we got a new councillor, Kim Huffman, and we have a gentleman who's been with us for some time, Roger Geisens, and they're in the lower remuneration score there. So I guess I'd have to go back to the bylaw and delve through it deeply, but you know, I was just hoping for an explanation just on that page there, because it does stand out.
Through the chair to Councillor Rabbits, in particular with Kim Huffman, she was on a leave for a period of the year, so that would be why she would be different as well.
I think Councillor Van Passen and possibly Councillor Michelli might have something to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. That was my assumption, that Councillor Huffman took a leave of absence to run during the election, so she didn't get paid for a period of time. And without, trying to sound bad, I would imagine that Councillor Geisens doesn't have to pay into the Canada Pension Plan anymore, so both his share plus the corporate share would not be included, and that would make the difference in the total remuneration. And your question about per diems, no, the county doesn't pay per diems. The Conservation Authority pays per diems. We just include it in the list. And Councillor Columbus, as the chair, gets the honorarium as the chairman. So, and can I bring up I did do something when this report came out, because I have a book at home and I can write in cursive writing in the book. And in a few years, there's going to be a whole generation that doesn't know what either one of those are. But I did add up, in 2019, I attended, between meetings and committee meetings and council meetings and events, 241 different events on 179 different days, handled 303 phone calls at my home phone number that required follow-up or a site visit. And unfortunately, the IT department can't figure out how many emails I got, and I don't know how many phone calls came on my county cell phone, but I think earned my pay last year. I'm not sure.
Councillor Michelli, then Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the first 3 points that Councillor Van Passen made were the exact ones I was going to make, and maybe I'll just add, because I don't have another point, that the good thing about his cursive writing in his own book is that he can now, if no one can ever figure out what it is, he can say what he wants.
Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the per diem for the a member who participates at the Long Point Region Conservation Authority across the 6 municipalities that we represent is $100 per meeting. Okay. And on the Police Services Board, only those members who are appointed by the Ontario government are paid a per diem. A councillor is not paid a per diem for participating on that board.
There are no further questions. I'd like to just make a couple comments myself. I see that the Simcoe Reformer posted an article today, and I think that the transparency and having this discussion and having this item pulled as a consent item is important to do, and we all have had thrown the word transparency and accountability around this table many, many times. So I too would like to speak. I can't speak for Mayor Chop, but I can speak for myself, and mileage and attending conferences and things of that nature have certainly been expensed on my end, and I can say that through the attendance of these conferences and whatnot, we've successfully brought home millions of dollars to Norfolk County, and that's not something I've done alone. It's not something Mayor Chop's done alone. It's something we've, as a team, have done through motions and letters of thanks and requests, and putting FaceTime in directly with ministers. So we brought, one and a bit million home for our causeway. We have a announcement in this agenda for 3.17 coming here to Norfolk County for Indwell, and I think it's important work that we're doing, but it's also an important discussion to be had and be very transparent and clear about what this job entails. So thank you, Councillor Van Passen, for pulling it. And I think we have time to maybe even go on to the next one. Oh, sorry, right, mover and a seconder for this. Councillor Van Passen, seconded by Councillor Taylor, and all of those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. So let's go on to consent item C, staff report DCS 20-28, update to parking bylaw.
So I understand that this was pulled, and I'll take questions.
Councillor Michelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This, just to review this with staff, this is a move to put up no stopping signs rather than no parking signs. Is that correct? And it's because there has been a problem with the location where transport truck drivers are parking on the shoulder of the road across from a local business. And when I was reading through the report, did we have discussions with that particular business about suggestions they might have? And I'm sure probably Councillor Columbus can maybe answer some of this, so I will either let him or staff take care of it.
Madam Chair, if I could answer that. Yes, for the last number of years, and it's been ever-increasing problem, whereby they get as many as 120 tractor-trailer loads a day coming out of that plant. And the drivers park on the east side of the road there, 59 highway. It's a very busy stretch. There's been some near misses there, and there's been other issues with some of the drivers. So they'll sit there for a long time, many times. And it's a dust problem, and also they're destroying the road in that area. So Scots Canada has actually agreed that we put these no stopping signs there to eliminate the problem. As a matter of fact, they called me today, wanted to know when this will be implemented, this no stopping, so that they can direct the drivers to another area to marshal them in to get their loads. Perhaps Ms. Budis has more information.
Well, the only thing I wanted to add, because I didn't have very much detail in the report itself, is I commented that notwithstanding efforts by the planning department, and as I understand it, there was there is additional property. I can't remember if they had to acquire it or for what we had to do to rezone it, something to allow them to use that space for their trucks, and it's just not being used for their trucks. There is another location, I think, where they can make deliveries to. So I think there are options, and we just need to make sure this is not one of them.
Councillor Marcelli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, Paula, just for clarity, we are going to install no stopping signs. And I just happened to notice that on page 2 of the report, it indicates that the costs will be absorbed within the existing budget we have, but it says it will be the installation of no parking signs, and we do mean no stopping signs. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, and I don't think I read the financial comments before the report went, so we'll make sure that's no stopping.
Okay.
I know exactly what's going up.
All right, thank you. I'm sure you do.
Councillor Van Passen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Councillor Columbus brought this up. There's 120 trucks a day going in and out of there. I'd like to see that get to 200. So the more business they do, the better it is for the county. So, can we follow up, whether it's Public Works or planning, and work with that company to try to, let's find a different spot, let's find a better way, better signage, bigger intersection, or bigger turn lanes into the parking lot, do whatever needs to get done to make it safe for the traveling public, but also allow that company to keep on doing what they've been doing every year. So.
Bounce it over to Councillor Columbus and then maybe
Yes,
to Mr. Galbi.
Councillor Van Passen, they actually have rented the former tobacco warehouse parking lot on the west side of that building, and it's completely filled up with bags of product. So there'll be trucks coming out of there as well. And they have met with me to discuss purchasing an additional acreage behind their plant to alleviate this problem down the road. But I would like to ask Ms. Budis when this no stopping bylaw will come into effect on the 59 highway.
So it should be the next meeting. The next council meeting, March 24th, will have an actual bylaw written to operationalize both of these things.
Okay, seeing no further questions, so mover and a seconder to receive this. Councillor Michelli, seconded by Councillor Rabbits, and all those in favor. And that is carried. Okay, I believe that there is some food here. We have deputations starting shortly, so quick break, and then we'll come back for just before 5 o'clock for a 5 o'clock start. Perfect.
On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world and can't wait to return home. Drop a line in a placid lake or stroll along the shore. Take a tour on a peaceful country road and bound to be back for more. Of Norfolk, Norfolk, my southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. With hard work we built a dream that only willing hands could do. It's on display at our fall fairs and at all the festivals too. Erie beaches, Carolinian forests, where the flower and dogwoods bloom. Patchwork fields and rolling hills, it's just the place for you. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Norfolk, 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 you won't be a stranger long. On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger long. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world and can't wait to return home. Drop a line in a placid lake or stroll along the shore. Take a tour on a peaceful country road and bound to be back for more. Of Norfolk, Norfolk, With hard work, we built a dream that only willing hands could do. It's on display at our fall fairs and at all the festivals too. Erie beaches, Carolinian forests, where the flower and dogwoods bloom. Patchwork fields and rolling hills, it's just the place for you. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger along. Norfolk, 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 you won't be a stranger along. On a strip of sandy soil lies a county called Norfolk. It's Ontario, south coast, you know, and it's surely not remote. If you pass through or spend a day or decide to call it home, you'll see why we love it here and are proud to call it our own. Norfolk, Norfolk, a southern county home. Norfolk, Norfolk, we know you can't go wrong with the friendly folk of Norfolk. You won't be a stranger along. Take in the small town atmosphere, be amazed at all that we grow. Like our kids that go and see the world and can't wait to return home. Drop a line in a placid lake or stroll along the shore. Take a tour on a peaceful country road and bound to be back for more. Of North
With
If Canada has a heartbeat, that heartbeat is the Canadian farm. For over 150 years, Canadian farmers have faced the toughest conditions head-on, with one goal in mind: to get food to your table.
Well, obviously, the farm is kind of a celebration of the hard work of our family. So, as many farms are, they're kind of a staple of family unity, family work.
This farm's been in our family for about 4 generations, since the 1800s. So we've focused on orchard and asparagus. So we grow apples, tart cherries, and some pears.
I enjoy being part of a business that impacts so many different families and really helps improve the quality of life for people.
My parents and I, well, we purchased the farm in 1990, but personally been doing it for almost about 20 years on my own.
It sure is fun getting up in the morning and having something that's actually contributing.
Horticulture is a quarter of agriculture in Canada. And it's what you actually go to the grocery store and pick that apple, pick that cherry.
Healthy eating is a hot topic these days, so it just seems like we're involved in an industry that's really in the hip and the now.
We have a microclimate in Canada that we can grow almost all the different types of fruit and vegetables that we need.
It's hard work, tilling and planting and pruning and harvesting. Working the land and gambling that the weather gods will be kind.
Efficiency is absolutely critical. Attention to detail is absolutely critical. And to try and hire enough local people, we know isn't possible. There's a huge labor gap, especially in horticulture across the country.
Most people don't understand agriculture as a whole. I don't think they understand how much work goes into production. A lot of it's physical labor, so it is a lot of us picking, packaging, like we package all of our cucumbers by hand.
The days are possibly gone of lots of people realizing the benefits of working outside, getting some fresh air, using their muscles.
The reality is that lots of local people, they don't want to work in the farm because everybody looking for other jobs, inside, indoor jobs, right?
En sachant que le bassin d'emploi ici au Québec, Canada, on n'a pas de gens, c'est plate à dire, compétents pour faire la tâche. Des gens qui sont prêts à travailler de très très longues heures dans des conditions chaudes pour faire un ouvrage qui est essentiel pour la production agricole.
We used to hire a lot of local teenagers. They simply weren't interested in working the long hours outside in the sun. They wanted, short 3-hour days and just 3 days a week, and then they were on vacation for the 3 weeks that strawberries were ready. So it just was really hard to schedule and manage all of that.
For the last half-century or so, a group of people from places like Guatemala, Mexico, Trinidad, and Jamaica, people like Shervin, Nalini, Babu, and Joe, have come to Canada every year, stood beside our farmers and greenhouse operators, and made it possible for this extraordinary work to take place. And we've opened our hearts to them. That's just how it is in Canada.
If I didn't have access to labor from the Seasonal Agriculture Worker Program, I don't think I would be farming. My last year farming without bringing in my employees from Mexico, man, I was ready to give up. Just for my Golden Delicious, I went through 16 different people. Some people would say, oh, we'll be there tomorrow. They wouldn't show up. Other people would show up, but they would just be, dropping the apples like crazy, turning them into juice.
So the temporary foreign worker programs are essential in filling that gap, but also because you have the opportunity to offer a person a contract the next year, and they have the opportunity of whether or not they want to work for you again the next year. You have that opportunity to have consistency of training, so you're not training a whole group of people every year.
It's the way the world functions. We have to compete in this country against a lot of offshore products that are manufactured, grown, whatever, in economies where the standard of living is nowhere near what we dream of.
Councillor Michele, Councillor Columbus, are we ready?